طيب، بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. So tonight, or this evening, we continue inshallah with the Aqeeda course, and I think this is the sixth or seventh lecture. I'm not sure anymore. We're kind of moving along within the six pillars of Iman, which is what this course basically is going to cover, with different degrees of depth regarding each of these pillars, as retaining to the level of significance or importance that they carry for a common Muslim, just to have a sound Aqeeda and a sound level of theology. Today, we're talking about, we stopped at this last week, and I'm going to go through it with you, is the categories of people. This is a tertiary Aqeeda point. It's absolutely not one of the main Aqeeda topics. But it comes up so often via questions and concerns and ponders by young Muslims and by Muslims in general that I put it in this course just to kind of cover it and talk about it briefly. So, and I think it comes from a lack of understanding of i'tiqad in general, where we get a bit preoccupied and obsessed with where people are going. We want to know where other people are going, which tells me that there's lack of understanding of your i'tiqad, because if you do understand your i'tiqad appropriately, then you'd be very, very concerned about where you're going, unless where others are going. Aside from maybe what help or what assistance you can provide in da'wah or any general guidance. But nonetheless, it's still important to understand the basics. In this life, the people are either Muslim or not. That's it. And this makes life very easy. We don't need to, we accept people as they represent themselves, the zahir, whatever it is that they show of themselves. Either you're Muslim or you're not Muslim. And if you're Muslim, then ahkam muslimin will, the rulings regarding Muslims will apply to you. And if you're not, then they won't. And it's not an issue of cursing people or the concept of takfir. That's a whole different ball game. I'm not here to entertain that topic today at all. It's not an aqeedah. It doesn't really have a space. But people in this life, when it comes to rulings and it comes to how we see them or how we deal with them, is either Muslim or non-Muslim. And then Muslim, obviously, there's what you're learning is what applies to you. But then non-Muslims, in this life, there are different groups, and they're not all the same. So in this life, you have polytheists, so people who have beliefs of other gods, atheists who don't believe in gods or agnostics at all, believers in other gods, which we call kuffar. So polytheists are the asnam, the ones who mushrikeen, those who worship asnam. Kuffar are the ones who have other gods of some sort that they believe in. Mukaththib or a jahid means someone who's a refuser of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, someone who has studied this in depth and took a stand to be anti-monotheism or anti-religion altogether. Not everyone is like that. Most people just don't care enough to take a stand, and they just have a different belief system, or they grew up with a different belief system. A mukaththib is someone who makes it very clear that they're anti what it is that you're saying, and they refute it and work against it. People of the book, people who have other laws, like we talked about before, Christians and Jews and Majus, and Buddhists and Hindus and others. And then combatives, those who are in war with you, and those who are trying to harm you, or those who have taken the issue from argument or debate or discussion to bearing arms and depriving you your right of being Muslim. So they're not all the same. They're different. I mean, there's different rules apply. But from a jurisprudence perspective, from a fiqh perspective, simplistically, we deal with all Muslims justly, fairly. We show excellence. These are the teachings and the wordings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has in the Quran and in the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. There's abundance of evidence that explains to us how we're supposed to carry ourselves around non-Muslims. What we don't do is we don't form political alliances against Muslims with them. That's where we draw the line. Like where the line is drawn for Muslims is that you don't get into, and this is, you as an individual will never have to deal with this because you're not really a political leader. You'd have to be, this applies to political leaders, the khulafa and the salatin and the people who carry the burden of ruling Muslim land and the Muslim world. They are obligated not to make political alliances with against non-Muslims, against Muslims with non-Muslims. That's kind of where it's drawn. But aside from that, it's really not much of an issue. I I get I get questions sometimes that tell me that people don't comprehend this very well. Like they'll ask me, is it okay for us to give salams to non-Muslims? Can I do it first? And this is based on maybe someone who picked up a book hadith or Googled something on the internet and read a narration and decided, okay, this is you have to differentiate. When the Prophet ﷺ talked about the kuffar, he had all of these different groups in front of him. He was dealing with Ahl Kitab, he was dealing with Mukaththibin, he was dealing with combatives, he was dealing with polytheists and kuffar and atheists. He had all of them were ahead of him. So when he talked about certain things, alayhi salatu wasalam, he was referring always to a group. He wasn't referring to all of them. He wasn't referring to all of them. You're obligated to be at your best behavior as a Muslim around non-Muslims who are not combative and who are citizens living with you and who are Ahl Kitab and people who pay jizya, for example, or those who are a part of the same country that you live in and they're your peaceful neighbors. You are obligated to be at your best behavior at all times. So the question is, can I give salams? Can I visit? Can they? Of course, all of that is, of course, you have to. If you didn't, you would be, the Prophet ﷺ would visit his Jewish neighbors all the time. And we have a lot of stories behind this. And the Quran is quite clear on this topic. When the Prophet ﷺ would give us certain rulings of, don't say this first or don't do that, it was regarding those who were combative. I mean, you're talking about the kafir harbi, fil harb, meaning it's during war, or someone who is showing the fangs of war to you. And then that becomes, and that makes sense, obviously, or else this narrative that Muslims can't be loving and peaceful around non-Muslims is very, this is the dakhil, this is a bid'ah. This is something that was added. Muslims were never like this. Like historically, this question has never come to light. Muslims have never asked these questions and never had a problem with these issues historically. This is all very innovative in the last maybe century or so, that these questions actually have been posed and you have to answer them, because it sounds like the fact that they're being asked for me is a problem. The fact that a kid has to ask, is okay if I'm a friend with I'm at school and I'm a friend with someone like this? Can I be nice to someone who's like this? Can I be? Yeah, who's educating? I need to know who's teaching you. Like this is a big problem. Like if you have doubt, if somehow you're being led to believe that you cannot be these things with people around you, then the way you're being educated about Islam is very dangerous, and it absolutely does not represent the Aqeeda in any way. But combatives are different, and I'm stuck between these two ridiculous extremes. Stuck between these two ridiculous extremes, these contradicting narratives. On one side, you have these idiotic, moronic leaders that are normalizing their relationships with an occupying force in the middle of the Muslim world, and children who don't know if they can say hi in the morning to their Christian friend in school. Like, this is absolutely, this must be the stupidest time of all time. Like, it's impossible that it's hard for me to believe that there'll be a time in the future that's more idiotic for us than this, where I have to explain to a child, yes, you can say salam alaikum to your friend in school, and yes, you can share your lunch and be nice to him, and he can come over to your house, and I have to tell to the leader, maybe you don't normalize with the people who want to kill us all. How about that? How about you just don't make them your friends? How about you don't have an embassy in your country? Can you maybe do that much? To actually have to have these conversations just tells me how far away we are just from basic logic. Aside from the rulings of Islam are pretty clear, but there's also a little bit, there has to be some degree of decency and rationale. But I think this confusion is very telling for us as Muslims today. This confusion that we're living, it needs to be corrected. It needs to be corrected through ilm, through proper knowledge, and through proper knowledge seeking, and through a generation of young Muslims who want to learn their deen appropriately and are willing to practice it as such as well. We offer the warnings and glad tidings that the Quran states to people based on how they identify. So if you identify as a Muslim, then I will speak to you in one narrative. And if you tell me that you're non-Muslim, I will speak to you in a different narrative, right? So you can't tell me that you're Muslim and then I have to spend hours kind of convince you that you should salli and you should wear hijab and you should, ghud basarak, and you shouldn't perform zina. It doesn't make any sense. You're Muslim. Why? I don't need to spend time explaining to you the basics and arguing the fundamentals of the faith. Well, if you're not Muslim, then we have to. And if you're not Muslim, I don't even start there. You would never start there, by the way. Absolutely not. I will absolutely not take a question about the age of Sayyidina Aisha from someone who's not Muslim. I'm not taking that question. That's a silly question to ask, and it's a silly question to try and answer for many reasons, because you don't build faith from that point. You don't build your iman. If you listen to I'm repeating certain points that I made in the series. So if I see people who don't seem to know what I'm talking about, then I know you didn't listen to this. You have to listen to the series. You have to listen to the 7-episode Facing Disbelief series, because you have to learn. I have a little bit more time. And I talk to you about where you believe, how you build iman. Where do you build it from? Like, where does it start? It doesn't start by asking these questions. It doesn't start by tertiary topics of life. No, you have to build your iman on the fundamentals of existence. Yeah, and then when you come to that the conclusion based on the universe and life and history and your experience, once you come to the conclusion of a creator, of one creator, and you look at what the Prophet ﷺ and all the prophets before him have been teaching, once you conclude La ilaha illallah, then it's easy to follow the rulings. The rulings are just, they're, as I say in Arabic, tahsil hasil. They're going to be the natural results of you just knowing the bigger questions. So if you are questioning the smaller stuff, and it's causing you a lot of shubha, and I have people come up and they have like 10, 15 questions about still simple little things. All these. Why did the Prophet ﷺ have married so many times? Why were there so many wars? Right? These are questions that you ask in a space of talab ilm, to seek knowledge so you can learn. Not because you're struggling with this theologically. These are not theological struggles. It's ridiculous to see them as theological struggles. The theological struggles are what we're talking about here in this course, and what I cover in the other series. You have to ask the big questions, and you have to come to conclusions with the big answers. And these tertiary topics, these are just concluded. In medicine, I can't sit down with a patient to argue exactly how this drug works on that receptor and why we haven't tried another receptor. I'm not going to do that. Right? I'm not going to, because the reason that you don't understand this is because you don't have a medical degree and you didn't major in biology. So go back and do that, and then this won't become a problem anymore. Like, once you do that, you won't have to ask me this question and have such a big problem. I don't understand. Of course, you're not going to understand, because you're arguing a tertiary point where you have not established the fundamentals. The same thing comes from Islam. If you're going to sit down and argue the base, why can't Muslims drink alcohol? Why do we have to dress in a certain way? Why do we have to pray 5 times? No. These are not. You don't ask these questions when you're looking into your deen. These are ridiculous questions. This tells me that you have the person who's asking this has a ridiculous thought process. That's not how you do. You have to ask the big questions, and you have to conclude the big answers. And then when you come to those conclusions, those big questions with those big answers, then it's easy. These things they just fall into place. If you accept La ilaha illallah, then you're not going to need to argue with you. How does a miracle happen? How could how could Isa alayhi salam be born like this? If you accept La ilaha illallah, then these are simple. If you don't accept La ilaha illallah, then they're impossible for you, but they're not the reason that you have problems with your faith. Your problems aren't based on these things. Your problems are based on that you have not accepted the Creator and what He is capable of and what He put in place on this earth. When you accept that, everything else is easy. How did the Prophet ﷺ, there's small food and he fed the army? No. That I don't have to explain. I don't know, and I'm not going to waste time trying to argue that with you, because that's not where you win your deen or lose it. That's not the arena for any of it. All right. So the main problem, this is the main problem of the concept of hypocrisy. What we're talking about here is that hypocrisy is someone who says that they are Muslim up front, but then they don't actually mean it on the inside, and they cause problems for us because they're not clear. For us as Muslims, what we need is just clarity. Are you Muslim or you're not? If you are, okay, here are the tithes. And here's the buy-in, and here's what's required of you. If you're not Muslim, here's what we're going to talk to you about. We're going to perform da'wah and try to present what it is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent and what the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam's message was, and I'm going to do that. If you're Muslim, then get on board and start doing your job. Like start carrying and moving along. Hypocrites, they're willing to be called the name, but they're not willing to actually carry the burden. Like they're dead weight on the ummah's wagon. They're dead weight. They won't do the job, but they won't admit that they're not Muslim and get off, so that we can figure out how many people we actually have and how to divide the responsibilities, and maybe not put them in positions of leadership and authority. But when there exists, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about humul aduwwu fahdharhum. They are the true enemy, so be aware of them. He hardly ever uses that term elsewhere in the Quran. He almost never points out adawa aside from Iblis and the munafiqeen. Why? Because of the difficulty that they cause based on this simple algorithm that we're looking at here. The reason that I'm pointing this out is that if you get overoccupied or preoccupied by where people are going, like where are the non-Muslims going to go as individuals or as groups, then you're wasting a lot of energy and time on a topic that you should be less, you shouldn't be that interested in. So let's move on to the second one. No. Here we go. So on the Day of Judgment, people will fall under many other categories. So in this world, as far as we're concerned, there's Muslim, there's non-Muslim. And the non-Muslims fall under categories that where we are given guidance on how to deal with them. So non-Muslims, Ahl Kitab, there's a certain way of going by them. Combative, a certain way. Mukathib, a certain way. Other non-Muslim. So we just have rules of what to do around them so that we can preserve our own integrity, and we take care of them as well, and we respect them, and we treat them well, and we perform da'wah to them in the appropriate manner. You don't take da'wah to a combative Muslim unless you have a combative non-Muslim, unless you have the upper hand. If you don't have the upper hand, then you don't do that, because that's not the place for da'wah. Da'wah is offered to Muslims or non-Muslims who are peaceful. But on the Day of Judgment, it's different. There are many other categories on the Day of Judgment. The Day of Judgment is the categories are very different. And we don't know who's going to be carrying the ticket to get across the finish line Yawm al-Qiyamah and who's not. And it's not just based on the simple question, are you Muslim or not? There are many other questions that have to be asked. And there's a lot more that needs to be taken into consideration. And there's a lot of background information that you don't know, which is why you come Yawm al-Qiyamah to be judged absolutely alone. You're completely alone. You stand there by yourself and you speak to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because there's a long story. You get that, and the non-Muslim get that, and the combative non-Muslim gets that, and the mukathib, and the Ahl Kitab, they all get that. They all get the one-on-one time so they can be judged, so they can be asked, so they get to offer their story, and because everyone's going to be treated differently. People, and there's a wording for this in the books of I'tiqad, in the books of fiqh. You find this, the Usul al-Fiqh is probably where this was talked about the most, honestly, where they talk, man narju lahum najah. This is the wording for it. Those who there's hope that they will make it Yawm al-Qiyamah, they'll survive, like they'll make it to the other side. Aside from the believers, people who did everything right. Here is aside from people who did the muttaqeen and the mu'mineen and the salihin and the siddiqeen. Aside from those who did everything the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he is satisfied with them. Aside from those, we believe that the Muslims who perform minor sins will hopefully survive. Muslims who perform major sins will hopefully survive. Believers who existed before Islam altogether. Monotheists who never received the message of Islam, or monotheists who received the message of Islam incorrectly. The searchers for truth. People who searched for the truth, who wanted to find the right belief, maybe never found it in their lives. People of goodness and ethics who did not receive the message of Islam or received it incorrectly in their lives. Others are even pointed out in the Quran, إلا المستضعفين من الرجال والنساء والولدان لا يستطيعون حيلة ولا يهتدون سبيلا فأولئك عسى الله أن يعفو عنهم وكان الله عفوا غفورا. People who are severely oppressed. They may, those severely oppressed people and are extremely poor and very sick and have no prospect, and they could be polytheists. They could be many different things. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, عسى الله أن يعفو عنهم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may very well, completely pardon them Yawm al-Qiyamah. So these are all categories and groups of people that may find themselves, surviving Yawm al-Qiyamah. So what you really need to know is that where people go at Yawm al-Qiyamah is Allah's decision and His decision alone. He is the just judge, and He is more just than you are, and He is more merciful than you are. And you have no space in this realm at all. Like, you have no business talking about this or inserting yourself into it, or asking or projecting or questioning or pushing, because you have absolutely no room here at all. Neither do I. This is ta'allin ala Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You are now, we're going too far. We are putting our nose in too far into business that is not ours. He told us that he told me that I have to watch out for myself and I have to save myself. For me to say, oh, I did that already. But what about Fulan and Fulana? What about this group of people? What about those people? As if I'm holding him accountable to a standard that I think is merciful and righteous. And if he doesn't hold to it, then I don't want that. That's not how this is done. So it's not appropriate for us to ask these questions. Where are people going Yawm al-Qiyamah? Allah knows. That's the answer. Allahu A'lam. What I can tell you, that the Quran says this. The Quran says the mu'min, the muttaqi, the muhsin, the sabir, the mujahid will find rahmah and will go to Jannah. And the kafir and the mukaththib and the jahid and the mushrik will be punished Yawm al-Qiyamah and go to nar. These are the general rules of the Quran. The Quran is not a catalog for people's destinations. That's not how you deal with it. You're like, oh, hold on a second here. You have no idea where people are going. Absolutely. Aside from whom he pointed out subhanahu wa ta'ala specifically, like Fir'aun and Qarun and Iblis, like he and on the other side, specifically who he pointed out, like the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam and Mu'min Yasin and Mu'min al Fir'aun. We don't know where people are going. Aside from whom the Prophet ﷺ said he saw in Jannat al-Na'im, and even them, even they, because it wasn't in the Quran, they were always in fear. They were always in reverence because it was not in the Quran. And the Prophet ﷺ he's trying to save himself before he can establish other people being saved. So this is how the mindset has to be. That we are not judges, and we can't look at a group of people and say, you're all going to Jahannam. A'udhu billah. You do that, and I fear for your own destiny, Yawm al-Qiyamah. Because that is way too outrageous, and it's very risky to say stuff like that. And it's very rude, actually, and it's not something for us to do. We deliver a message, and we tell people, here's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying. Now you worry about your destination. Here's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said about people who behave like this and people who behave like that. And now you worry about your destination, not me. I don't worry about that. It's not my business. I have no place telling you where you're going, right? And the Prophet ﷺ taught us this many, many times in the seerah, where people would state this person's here, this person's there, and he would correct them. Obviously, moments that were put together by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what the Sahaba would learn. That you don't know. You very rarely know where people are headed Yawm al-Qiyamah. All right. Forgiveness after promising punishment is considered an attribute of perfection. However, failing to reward after promising reward is considered a flaw. Why am I saying this? Why I'm saying this is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may do whatever He wills Yawm al-Qiyamah. He can will whatever He wants. He can do with humanity whatever He wants. None of us sitting here, or anyone before us, or anyone to come after us, will have any right to ask Him or question Him in terms of what He does, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because He is the standard for all of the ethics that we claim to understand. And He made those standards, so He has nothing to answer to. Now, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells in the Quran about Himself that He will not be unjust. He will not perform both. He's the one who's holding Himself subhanahu wa ta'ala to these standards. I can't hold Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to anything. I have no rights in the realm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. With you, I do, because we are equal, and there are others who will fight for it. But with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I have no rights. There's no third party to ensure my rights. There's no group to go to ask if I have rights. I have no rights because I'm owned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, body, soul, and spirit. So to say words like that is insane. So there's nothing really that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do to me that can be called dhulm. However, He subhanahu wa ta'ala made the criteria. He put a criteria. Said, look, if you do this, then this was what you get, and I will not mistreat you. I will stick to what it is that I'm promising. That's what he did out of His karam, out of His mercy and His generosity, subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, when He promises a punishment and He promises a reward, if He doesn't come through with the reward, that is seen as a flaw. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala muqaddas anil flaw. He is exalted from being flawed as human beings are. So if He promises something good, then He will come through with it for sure. If He promises punishment, to forgive when you promise punishment, that is not seen as a flaw. Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we depend on our basic logic to understand His commands and understand His teachings in the Quran. And our simple logic is that if I threaten with a punishment, but then I don't come through and I show mercy, I say I'm going to punish those who do this, and then I'm merciful. That is not a flaw. That is an attribute of perfection. But if I promise everyone who performs this action, they get this, and I don't come through, then that's a flaw. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised those who did well with reward, then He will come through with it. But if He promised the mushrikeen, for example, or the kuffar with uquba, and He doesn't come through with the Yawm al-Qiyamah, can He be held to anything else? Can that be seen as a flaw? No. He may do whatever He wants. He made it very clear in the Quran. Inna Allah la yaghfiru an yushraka bi. And I made that clear at the beginning of this course, by the way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala indeed will not forgive shirk. But if He does Yawm al-Qiyamah, who's to stop Him? And who's to tell Him that He cannot? And is that seen as a flaw? No, it is not. And you're saying what I'm trying to explain, but this is not something that I'm just saying that because some people just have this tick in their mind. They have to hear it, so I'm telling it to them. But you have no business. You have no business sitting around contemplating what Allah does with fulan and illan. Understand, you're overstepping your boundaries. So be careful. I'm saying this to you because there are certain adab, there are certain etiquettes when it comes to the way we deal with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you have to be aware of. And you have to know where you stop. You have to know where you stop saying certain things. Al-Hajjaj Ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi was one of the very famous governors of Iraq in maybe 1,000 some years ago. Absolute, serial killer. This man was insane. If you study his history, you don't believe that someone like that existed 150 years after the Prophet ﷺ passed away. This man literally catapulted the Kaaba and broke it. He murdered Sahaba. He just people, the ulama hated this man. The abs, when he died, people, there were celebrations. There were ulama who fell down in sujood, did a full night's qiyam. Others, like the stories are like all spread throughout the books of when he died, how rejoiced Hassan al-Basri was and Ibn Sirin. And yet, at one point, when Hassan al-Basri at the end of his life was asked about Hajjaj, because people who were born later on didn't see his time and didn't witness it. And he said, he had reservations, so he didn't. He was like, قال ولكني أخشى من كلمة قالها. I'm afraid of a word he said. And what Al-Hajjaj said before he died, قال يا رب إن هؤلاء يزعمون أنك لا تغفر لي. These people here, they all say that you will never forgive me. قال فإني أخشى ما أخشاه من كلمته هذه. What I fear the most in this world is that word that he said, that he may find forgiveness on the day of judgment because of that word. All of these people around me are telling me, Anta Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yaghfir lak. Allah will sooner take Fir'aun out of Jahannam before he takes out. See, that's what I tell him. And of course, he's an absolute oppressor of his age. But he would say there's a certain degree of adab that we have to have when we speak. Yeah, you have to be careful. So when it comes to people's destinations, that's not my or yours. Don't touch that. Be worried about your own, and then let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala don't interfere in something that you're not responsible for. So just keep that in mind, because this comes up a lot. And where people go Yawm al-Qiyamah, that's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of that. Where you figure out where you're going to go, and then the people who are not Muslim, do your job. Take to them the da'wah that is correct. If they're Muslim, then hold them to Islam and help them become better Muslims. If they're not Muslim, show them Islam so that they may find it and represent Islam to the best of your ability. And that's all you're required to do. And then everyone else will live their stories, however they're going to live their stories. Okay. There's this one piece I didn't know where to put it, honestly, when I made this course a couple of years ago. But I put it here because I have to talk about it just for a second, because it's important. It's called Hujjiyat Khabar al-Ahad. So Khabar al-Ahad, what that means is a hadith or a narration that does not come to us through multiple narrators within each level of the chain of narration. And Sheikh Ziyad talks a lot about this in his hadith, and I talk about it in the hadith course that I give as well. So you can go back to those if you want to learn a little bit more about this. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, unlike the Quran, does not come to us through 1,000 people in each level of narration. The Quran, the Prophet ﷺ gave it to 1,000 of the Sahaba, who gave it to a couple of thousand of the Tabi'een, to a few thousand of the Tabi'een. So the Quran was robustly narrated to us, and it was written down. So there's really no question in terms of its authenticity. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, it didn't come that way. It came through chains of narration, but they were not as robust, not by any stretch of the imagination. You're talking about maybe most of the hadith of the Prophet, 90% of them, come through one person in each level of the chain. يروي فلان إمام الشافعي عن مالك عن ابن شهاب الزهري عن نافع مولى ابن عمر عن ابن عمر. Just one person each. Maybe you'll find any khabar, any narration that has, let's say there are 6 people narrate. There's 6 people in the chain. And in each level, there are 10 people. But then one level, there's only one person. This is khabar ahad. This is considered khabar ahad. Because there's a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So if at one point it's just one person, then this is a khabar ahad. Even if all the other levels have thousands of people narrating the hadith. And that's just how the scholars of this discipline have put it together. So how can we use khabar al-ahad in Aqeedah? So accepting a hadith that has only one person in one of the levels of its chain of narration, only one person in one of its levels. It doesn't have to be in every level. It's in one of its levels, called khabar ahad, right? Known as hadith ahad, a very important source of evidence for us as Muslims. We use it all the time. We need it all the time. Islam would not, as a deen, we would have a lot of things we wouldn't know about the Prophet ﷺ, a lot of experiences. We need khabar al-ahad. The question is accepting it in theology, in Aqeedah specifically, because Aqeedah is an extremely obviously it's extremely important and it's agreed upon. So how do we accept it here or not is a complex issue. It requires a fair amount of unpacking, and I'm not going to do that in this course. I just want you to know about the topic, so if you hear about it, you understand the basics. For the purpose of this course, just know the following: that the Athari school, and this is where the difference really lies. Like remember, a few sessions ago, I showed you kind of where the khilaf comes in for the Atharis and the Ash'aris and Maturidis. Kind of comes in how they understand, how they interpret words like wajh and yad and what they do with. But really, that is the symptom. That's like that would happen. The main reason that all that exists is because of how they deal with khabar al-ahad. The Athari school accepts a hadith ahad in creed unconditionally. If it's sahih, if it's authentic, they accept it unconditionally. The Ash'aris and Maturidis accept it conditionally. They have conditions that they apply to it. And because of these two ways of kind of dealing with evidence, we have different ways in Aqeedah. Like we have different opinions within creed itself. But this is a much more, yeah, this is something that we would, if we were to teach here, we would teach in a third level of Aqeedah, honestly, not even a second. But I just want you to understand kind of where the differences come from. It's how they deal with the narrations that come from the Prophet ﷺ that have only one person. Like it's a narration, it's a hadith, it's authentic, but it's not mutawatir, it's not aziz, it's not mashhur. It's just so what do we do with it? Atharis are much more open and accepting it in Aqeedah, and the Ash'aris are a little bit more. They take the time with that because it's because of Aqeedah. What is right and what is wrong here is not my interest, and I'm not even saying what is right and what is wrong. I'm just saying this is where the difference of opinion actually stems from. So if you're interested in this, both opinions claim authenticity, and both opinions claim that they originate from the Sahaba and from the early scholars generations. They have their arguments of why they perform it one way versus the other, and this is something that is for a much more comprehensive review within this topic. So let's read a little bit within the matan because we've done a fair amount of kind of coverage, different topics. So we'll just go through the matan a little bit. So Imam الطحاوي رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلمه says ليس بعد الخلق وليس بعد خلق الخلق استفاد اسم الخالق ولا بإحداث البرية استفاد اسم الباري له معنى الربوبية ولا مربوب ومعنى الخالق ولا مخلوق وكما أنه محيي الموتى بعدما أحيا استحق هذا الاسم قبل إحيائهم كذلك استحق اسم الخالق قبل إنشائهم ذلك بأنه على كل شيء قدير وكل شيء إليه فقير وكل أمر عليه يسير لا يحتاج إليه شيء ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير. So he makes a very important point here that I need to explain for you. So he said, not after, I think we have a translation for it, right? Don't we? Oh, perfect. Yeah. So this way you can see the translation. I don't have to. Yeah. So it is not because that he created, he is a creator. It is not because he made or brought life that he is the maker. He is a Rabb, he is a Lord without there being a marbub, someone to be a Lord over. He is a Khaliq, a creator, without there being a makhluk, something that's created. And this is important understanding the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He did not require us to have these attributes. Meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is muhyi al-mawta, even if there's no mawta. He is the grantor of life, even if there is no life to be granted, because it's an attribute to him, subhanahu wa ta'ala, not a decision made or an action that was done within time. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a creator, even if there are no creations. And he is a Lord, even if there are no subjects. And he is the grantor of life, even if there is no life to be granted and there's no living things. Because he did not gain these attributes because of us or after we came along, but these are attributes of himself subhanahu wa ta'ala, with us or without us. And the concept here is because it's not based on doing something. See, I can only be a father if I'm actually able to bring forward a son or raise a young child. But that's how it is for me, because I am bound by time. If I never have children, I never raise children, then I can't use that term. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's not how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's a divine attribute for him. That's his divine name. He's a creator. Whether creations come along or not, whether he performs the action doesn't make a difference, doesn't take away from the fact that he's a creator. And that goes for everything else in all of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names. And that's why Imam al-Tahawi uses this terminology. Excellent. All right. And the way he explains it, rahmatullah alayhi, in the matan, it says, and that's because he has power over all things. Everything is in need of him. Every matter is easy for him. He has no need for anything. There's nothing like him. So when you put all these attributes together, you understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not require to perform the action or have the action proven to actually work in order for you to give the attribute to him, unlike the human being. I have to actually perform the action. I have to pass the exams. I have to, fit myself into the career. I have to do the work so you can give me the name that is going to be attached to it. But for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is not the case. So we don't say that he is khaliq because of his khalq. No, he is khaliq with or without his khalq. He is a creator with the existence of creation and without the existence of creation. It makes no difference. It's important. خلق الخلق بعلمه وقدر لهم أقدارا وضرب لهم آجالا ولم يخفى عليه شيء قبل أن يخلقهم وعلم ما هم عاملون قبل أن يخلقهم وأمرهم بطاعته ونهاهم عن معصيته. He created his creation with his knowledge, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he decreed destinies for them, for all. And he set for them lifespans, ajal, and times where they would start and times where they would end. Nothing was hidden from him, subhanahu wa ta'ala, before he created them. And nothing that they were going to do nor did in their lives was going to be hidden from them after he created them, subhanahu wa ta'ala. He commanded them to obey his message and he forbade them from disobeying him. وكل شيء يجري بتقديره ومشيئته ومشيئته تنفذ لا مشيئة للعباد إلا ما شاء لهم فما شاء لهم كان وما لم يشأ لم يكن يهدي من يشاء ويعصم ويعافي فضلا ويضل من يشاء ويخذل ويبتلي عدلا وكلهم يتقلبون في مشيئته بين فضله وعدله وهو متعال عن الأضداد والأنداد لا راد لقضائه ولا معقب لحكمه ولا غالب لأمره. He says, rahmatullah alayhi, and everything that occurs is according. I always advise, like for the first 30 lines of this matan, to memorize it. Try to memorize the first 30 lines. They will serve you well as you go through your life. Everything that occurs is according to his decree and his will, subhanahu wa ta'ala. We've already talked about what that means in the past session. He is always, subhanahu wa ta'ala, accomplished. The will of his servants is only that which he wills for them. As I explained, we will because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed for us to have a will. Whatever he wills for them comes to be. Whatever he does not will for them does not come to be. He guides whomever he wills. He protects them and secures them as grace, acts of grace, meaning he guides people and takes care of people. This is an act of grace. And he leads astray whomever he willed, and he humiliates and he punishes and he puts them to trial in justice. And all of his creation are back and forth between his grace and between his justice. At all times, you are either between his fadl or his adl, subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're either being subjected to his grace or you're being subjected to divine justice. Either way, Yawm al-Qiyamah, you will find the final sum of it all, and you'll be granted that which you are worthy of, regardless of how things worked out for you in dunya. Nothing can repel his decree, amend his judgment, or overpower his command, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he is exalted beyond having opposites or partners. So I read those because those are the ones that we've talked about most of these topics. There's a few of them that we haven't, so we're going to start talking about them now. Iman in the day of judgment. So this takes me to so we talked about Iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in his kutub, in his rusul, in his malaika. We have two more left. We have Iman in the Yawm al-Qiyamah and then Iman in al-Qada' wal-Qadr. And al-Qada' wal-Qadr will be we'll take the lion's share at the end of this course. We'll give it a fair amount of time. But before that, we talk a little bit about Yawm al-Qiyamah because it's important. There's a few things here that are important. As I pointed out, Malaika, Yawm al-Qiyamah is also ghaib. It is a part of the unseen. We don't have access to Yawm al-Qiyamah. There's no place to go and visit it. We can't see pictures of it. We are only told stories of Yawm al-Qiyamah within the Quran. However, we were offered signs and conditions, minor signs and major signs. And the most important point in understanding Yawm al-Qiyamah are the two big words that come with it, which is, so aside from resurrection, because that's what leads to it. You can't have Yawm al-Qiyamah if you don't accept the fact that there's ba'ath by the resurrection. But then it's accountability and it's responsibility. These are the two concepts that you have to learn when you're listening or thinking about Yawm al-Qiyamah. This is the day where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stops giving the human beings choices, and they stop giving them. We don't have the margin to make decisions anymore. Our chance is up. And now, khalas, there's going to be accountability. All those that were granted some degree of freedom of choice are going to be brought in, and they're going to be offered that which they are worthy of, depending on what they chose to do. So when you think about Yawm al-Qiyamah, which is a huge theme within the Quran. When I say a huge theme, I'm saying like maybe half of the Quran is just talking about accountability. And it's talking about the day of judgment and what has it. And there's no surah in the Quran that's beyond a page that does not have within it some reminder about Yawm al-Qiyamah. And some small surahs, all they do is talk about Yawm al-Qiyamah. So there's an ongoing theme within the Quran to remind us of the accountability that is on its way and the responsibility that we carry when we are resurrected and when we come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Iman in the Day of Judgment is definitely one of the extremely powerful pieces of being Muslim. And when it does, one of the things that it does for you once you understand it and you see it as a pillar of Iman is that it changes your way of seeing death altogether. Like the fear of death goes from being the fear of just mortality, just nothingness or lack of existence, to the fear of what happens after resurrection and what Yawm al-Qiyamah holds for you, which is why the Quran talks about it so much and gives us so many scenarios and so many snapshots of what's actually going to occur to me and you, to us Yawm al-Qiyamah, so that we can make decisions that will put us in the right space for it. Now, that's the piece that you will learn in if you attend tazkiyah sessions or you attend tafsir sessions or you just take time to learn about your deen, you'll learn a lot about Yawm al-Qiyamah. It'll be meaningful. And if you want to increase understanding about that and the details of the Day of Judgment, then I did a series after Fajr for 21 episodes called The Stages of the Hereafter. That was, I think, the first Fajr, the first Ramadan that we had here. I think it was the first Ramadan. It was after Fajr. And it's on. There's a link in the slides that you can press and you can go listen to them. And I would say if you have not listened to the story of Nihaya, of the end of death and what comes afterwards in Yawm al-Qiyamah, then you absolutely should do that. And we do that almost every Ramadan on the 27th night. We kind of go through some of the motions of it, but. What I'm here to talk about, and I'm not here to teach that in this course. That can be done in a different course. But here, what I had to talk about specifically about the Iman and Day of Judgment are the signs and the pre-apocalyptic stories that precede the Day of Judgment, because this is where a lot of people get lost and they waste copious amounts of time, where I get a lot of questions that are misplaced. If you get preoccupied by the signs of the Day of Judgment and the pre-apocalyptic stories that are attached to it, then you're going to be in trouble. There's a lot of difference of opinion regarding this issue amongst scholars, not amongst me, amongst scholars of Islam historically and today, in terms of how to interpret these stories and how to deal with them. Every religion has a lot of apocalyptic stories that precede doomsday. We have a fair number of narrations as well in the Sunnah. Some of them we can authenticate, some of them it's hard to authenticate, some of them there are questions about them, and it's a realm, it's a discipline within Islamic knowledge that I think should be left for scholars to dwell upon, not for normal Muslims. If you become a talib ilm and you want to study, then you can, and even then you would limit the amount of time you spend learning this, because there's not much in it. So what's in the Quran? Because the Quran talked about the Day of Judgment more than any other topic by far. So what did the Quran say regarding the signs of the Day of Judgment? So the major signs in the Quran, you have Ya'juj and Ma'juj is brought up twice in the Quran, right? Twice. Now, I'm saying that so that you can, the frequency matters in the Quran as well. The frequency of things, like the halal and haram is not talked about twice in the Quran. It's talked about 200 times. The stories of the prophets maybe 300 times. Ya'juj and Ma'juj, they come up twice. The beast and naqa, or dabba, it comes up once. It's referred to once in the end of Surah An-Naml. The smoke, Dukhan, comes up once in Surah Al-Dukhan. The return of Jesus alayhi salam, it comes up once, and even the one time that it's there is controversial. Like, not all scholars agree that ayah is referring to him that way. So it's not a slam dunk ayah. Like, it's an ayah where it could be referring to that. We're not 100% sure. There are other major signs like the Dajjal and the Mahdi and the 3 landslides and the fire that gathers people and the sun rising from the west. No mention of that in the Quran at all. So out of the 9 signs of major signs, or 10 signs of the major signs of the Day of Judgment, 3 of them are mentioned in the Quran, and 1 is kind of mentioned in the Quran, and that's it, with a frequency of once or twice. That's it. That should be an indicator to anyone who's learning the Quran of the degree of importance that this topic has. However, what the Quran is very interested in is you being prepared for the questions you're going to get. and the accountability that you're going to face. And that's what the Quran is absolutely. That's in the Quran 300 times, at least, versus 1 or 2 times. So if you spend hours and days and months and years listening and writing and trying to figure out what, you have people sit down and say, oh, 2000 and whatever will be the it's a way to get famous, that's for sure. You can make some money off it, but it's absolutely ridiculous. It's one of the silliest things I've ever heard of. And they come up and they sit down and they take verses and they calculate. They make these weird, interesting calculations. They times this with that and they divide and then they subtract and then they come up that it's 2000. As if the Quran was interested in the Gregorian calendar and the timing that we have today. It's just very, unfortunate. This is not what it's for at all. Minor sins are actually something you can focus on a little bit. The minor signs, forgive me. Minor signs are what you can focus on a little bit. Why? Because minor signs, the majority of them are sins and acts of disobedience to Allah, so that you can be a force pushing back. So the idea is Yawm al-Qiyamah is the day where there are no more chances granted. Life, like the increase of human life is going to come to a halt, and people can't repent, and no khair can be done anymore, and no tawbah can be occurred. And that's why Yawm al-Qiyamah is the day where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wrath. It's the day of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wrath. That's what all the Anbiya say. They're all scared. They're all in fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wrath because this is Yawm al-Qiyamah. So what we can do is to delay that by what? By making sure. What are the minor signs? The minor signs are ignorance, murder, fornication, chaos. This is what the Prophet ﷺ talks about, right? In the hadith of Jibreel, where he asks him what is Islam, what is Iman, what is Ihsan. At the end, he asks him about when Yawm al-Qiyamah is, and he tells him the person you're asking does not know more than the person who's asking. Meaning, I know as much as you do. I have no idea. But what I do know is that من معلومات الساعة أن تلد الأمة ربتها وأن ترى الحفاة العراة رعاء الشاء يتطاولون في البنيان. When mothers give birth to ungrateful, disobedient people who treat them like they're slaves, and when you have the poor people of Arabia, bathing in wealth that they won't share with others and they use for personal leisure and that, which are two behaviors that are described, are problematic, and can be fixed and can be changed. Versus talking about the coming back, the return of Jesus and Dajjal and Mahdi, there's not one authentic hadith on, not one. All of them lack authenticity. All of them. Everything that was ever said about this individual lacks authenticity. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm saying everything that we have lacks authenticity, is not in the Quran anywhere. And I tend to feel that's a strong indicator. And I'll tell you why. Where in Islam were you ever raised to live your life waiting for a hero? Where in Islam? Show me where in Islam. Show me in the life of the Prophet ﷺ where he taught us that we should live our lives awaiting a hero to come and save us. And that's not how we were raised, and that's not how we were taught, and that's not what the Quran preaches. You are you are going to be that person. You're going to carry your burden. You're going to do what others think is impossible. You're going to achieve that which is not imaginable, because you're going to follow the teaching of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the idea of sitting around and waiting for a hero to come along. That is not Islamic at all. Like, not at all. But it is attractive. Waiting is fun. Waiting is, if there's nothing for me to do, awesome. I run to the vending machine, put down the medda, bring out the cards, and khalas, I have nothing. I can just wait. I eat, drink, and sleep and bathe until whoever's coming on their way to save us comes along. Versus you have to get up and row the boat. You have to actually do it. You have to build the ark. You have to build it yourself and sail, versus waiting for someone to come and do it. So there's a lot of problems with the way people deal with the major signs, the pre-apocalyptic stories. So just be careful about that a little bit. And I'm bringing it here just so that if you're one of those people who's accelerating towards reading all these, I'm hitting the brakes for you. It's not in your aqeedah. There's no use for it unless you're a alim. You should not be wasting time. And I have people coming out. I'll say, well, he said this, and where is the island that they saw the Dajjal, and could it be somewhere? And there are people who are sailing the Red Sea day and night in search of this. The people who have spent their life. Like, this tells me that you're not getting it. Like, you're missing the main point of what the deen is here to teach you. So be careful about these things. And I put for you in the slides the verses that talked about that. Surah Az-Zukhruf, for example. The last ayah number 61. وَإِنَّهُ لَعِلْمٌ لِلسَّاعَةِ فَلَا تَمْتَرُنَّ بِهَا وَاتَّبِعُونِ هَذَا صِرَاطٌ مُسْتَقِيمٌ. That's the ayah that they refer to that may be indicating that Jesus alayhi salam is coming back. That's it. But that ayah, وَإِنَّهُ لَعِلْمٌ لِلسَّاعَةِ, is not clear. Who is علم للساعة? What does ilm mean here, للساعة? What is this verse actually telling us? The majority of scholars believe that it's indicating his return alayhi salam, which is something. But then again, many don't. And by the way, there's maybe 35% of the Muslim scholars who don't believe that Isa is coming back. Sunni scholars. Just so you know, like a third of the Muslim scholars historically argued against that, that piece. I'm just saying that this is something that's not as much, like, it's the majority opinion for sure. But there are a lot of very well-known, famous, dependable scholars that we listened to who had issues with the narrations, had issues with the way this was taught, which is why I think this is a domain that is best left to the mutakhassisin, to those who are going to specialize. What do you need to know about Yawm al-Qiyamah? What the Quran has told you 100 times over. Just read Surah Al-Qari'ah and read Surah Al-Qiyamah and just read it'll tell you, and then you can focus on that which is at hand. And then the two times in about Ya'juj and Ma'juj, once at the end of Surah Al-Kahf, حتى إذا بلغ السدين بلغ بين السدين فقال يا ذا القرنين إن يأجوج ومأجوج مفسدون في الأرض. And then again at the end of Surah Al-Anbiya, حتى إذا فتحت يأجوج ومأجوج ومن كل. And I believe that they symbolize chaos. They symbolize chaos at the end of time. That's really what they symbolize for me. Just that the harj, meaning we'll come to a point where humanity has lost its grip over any form of social justice, and we'll just enter into a time of absolute chaos where there are no laws anymore and people just start eating each other. And that is where we're headed if we keep on electing absolute garbage cans into office, and we keep on sitting around watching while people who have no ethics and have no knowledge and have no ability to they have no connection with reality or with ethics or with decency run the world. And we're headed to that, and that's just sad. فارتقب يوم تأتي السماء بدخان مبين, which is the one time that he talks about dukhan. And then الناقة الدابة وإذا وقع القول عليهم أخرجنا لهم دابة من الأرض تكلمون. I just put the verses there in case you want to know where the verses in the Quran. This is it. This is the only things in the Quran that referred to the major signs of Yawm al-Qiyamah. That's it. Nothing else in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything else are narrations. Some of, like I said, with a lot of okay. Which brings us to the final piece. Oh, excellent. We have a little bit of time. So the reason that I want to spend time on this is because by far, this is the most, I would say controversial, because it's not controversial. It's not. So I point out to you things that are controversial amongst the scholars of Islam. Like this is not controversial amongst the scholars. It's really interesting to me. I have not been able to describe this phenomenon yet, where things that scholars are not differing upon, people don't accept, and people have their own little opinions about, and they do whatever they want. And things that scholars have had difference of opinion on from day one, from the day the Prophet ﷺ passed away, people expect there to be one way of understanding, and one way, and only one way, and we should divide the ummah based on that one way they can understand things. And that, to me, is just a very interesting thing. Qada and Qadar is where people tend to offer their generous opinions and talk about stuff that they don't understand at all, where Muslim scholars, historically, do not have a lot of difference of opinion here on the basics. On some of the tertiary topics, for sure, there was a lot. But on the basics, Muslim scholars do not differ at all. They're very clear on what it means to believe in Qada and Qadar. However, the Muslim public do not share that sentiment at all. And then other stuff where they're differing upon, people are very clear on. For someone to be, for example, for someone to be very clear on Isa coming back, but then ask, well, how does Allah know if I'm going to do something? This to me is like just get the shotgun out. And this is absolutely, how are you so sure about this? But then this simple, very simple part of understanding God and your life, you just sit there and you allow that narrative to be used in a way that is numbing. So the fact that you don't understand how Allah knows, you don't know, you use that to numb yourself. You don't have to do as much. Well, because already knows, and what's the point? Like, it's just used for you not to be motivated to actually perform the job and not to feel accountable and to feel almost like you have a good argument to push back against God under the objection of why you shouldn't be held accountable for what you're doing. And this is just, this is the problem that we have. Wallahi, it's the problem that we have. It's just the very simple aspects of Islam. People are very they're willing to give their thoughts on it and follow it, but then they're gonna the moon has to be Saturday to Saudi. The moon has to be Saturday for Ashura. one day I'll just get up and leave. I'll leave the country and go live on an island by myself, where I don't have to deal with this. We have to fight over. We fight these little things. Why does this matter? Well, why is this a big deal? It's not a big deal. This is the moon. We don't understand exactly when and how. Just let the guys who are doing this look into this. But no, but we will sit down and question. We will question the mightiness of God. Like we will question something that is crystal clear about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rudely and disrespectfully, almost mocking the whole topic, almost mocking his justice and mocking our accountability. It's done sometimes in a way, in an undertone of mockery that is absolutely disgusting. And I can tolerate it from a non-Muslim because I understand where they're coming from, but I cannot understand it coming from a Muslim. Not at all. And the same Muslim who will have an aneurysm if a young man walks in with a tattoo on or a lady walks in without hijab, they'll lose their minds. The same person, because they don't understand the difference. They don't know. They don't know what's fundamental, what is not up for debate, what is important for you, what you have to hold on to, what you have to protect and preserve, and what is, there's better and there's good and there's less good and there's difference, and you can leave that. You don't have to get too upset about it, but. Yeah, and how we're going to change that? It's knowledge. It's knowledge seeking that's going to change this. It's absolutely going to be knowledge seeking. Like, all it requires is a generation of people who are better educated, who have educated themselves appropriately, who will not allow themselves to be the subject of these types of this type of cheap agenda and cheap mockery of intellect, and they will focus on the matters that are at hand, that are important, and they will work towards them, and that's how the world changes, by the way, not just the ummah changes. The world changes based on just having just one generation of people who are willing to do that, and it's not that difficult. It's we can very much achieve that. So Iman in predestination. That's the wording I'm using for it in English. Is Qada and Qadar. I'm going to use predestination to kind of describe it because all other words don't seem to fit, and it's the closest. It stems Iman in this stems from understanding Allah's divine decree and will, which is one of His personal and divine attributes. So when we talked about the irada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah's divine will, divine decree. I told you everything in the universe falls under his decree, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing falls outside of that. Even the things that we don't necessarily, even the things that we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not pleased by, even the things that are harmful and evil, they still fall under His decree, subhanahu wa ta'ala, because nothing goes against His will. You can't force anything upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the way we understand His will and decree is that He willed, subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the world to exist in a certain way, for the universe to be created in a certain way, for nature to function in a certain way, and for us to have free will that allows us the margin that where we can choose to do things that are evil, and that option is there. And if we allow for it to happen, it will happen. If we decide that we're going to use our intellect and our strength and our organizational skills and our knowledge and our science to harm one another and to do bad things, and we have that it's there. But all of it falls under Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will and decree from an umbrella perspective. Al-Qada wal-Qadr is the manifestation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will and decree into time-space. So His decree and will is divine. So when I say divine, I mean it's not something that I can describe of how it works. But when it translates into my life, it translates as Qada and Qadr. So that's why we have it's an important part of understanding. So Iman, Qada and Qadr is a part of Iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a central part of believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, believing in at least one or maybe three of His attributes, of His divine attributes, one of them being His will. His will subhanahu wa ta'ala, His decree, is Qada and Qadr in our world. So how am I going to explain this to you? I'm going to start by talking about some important points that you need to understand. First of all, we'll talk about the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge, because this is very important. The nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the nature of it. In order for me to talk about that, the only way I can talk to you about that is by talking about the nature of my knowledge and the nature of your knowledge. The nature of our knowledge is based on observing patterns and repetitions, and then concluding from these patterns and these repetitions that you're going to end up with certain outcomes. So you see the same thing happen 3 or 4 times in a row with an outcome, 3 or 4 times outcome, then you conclude from that if you do this, and you'll end up with this. And this is how human beings started to learn. They started to they notice patterns, and they notice that the year and the weather, it fluctuates, and it fluctuates with a certain pattern. So we figured out the pattern. Now we know it's fall and spring and the day. So we started to learn. It's based on trial and error. You would try something, you would hit a rock with another rock. You get a spark. If you hit it with wood, it doesn't get a spark. So you try things, and as you trial and error, you figure out and you learn and you document that knowledge. And only until we learned that we actually had to document that knowledge that we actually got ahead, because for a while we were learning stuff and we were forgetting to document it. And we didn't document it. The guy died, and then no one really understood what he was talking about because he didn't document it. Now we had to wait for another guy, another genius to come a couple of centuries later to repeat the same thing. Then we hit us, we have to write this down. So someone starts writing things down. Now we have documentation. We can build. This is how we learn. This is the nature of our knowledge. It's trial and error. People are actually quite disappointed when they figure out that that's how science works. I find I run into it every once in a while in my clinic, because a lot of people feel like, even I think we have a problem with understanding the nature of our own knowledge. And if you don't understand the nature of our own knowledge, it's hard to understand what it means for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's nature of knowledge to be. Because if you think that medicine, for example, is anything aside from trial and error, then you're into for a very bad experience. Allah, if you or someone you love gets sick. You find out, we just tried things. We still are. Here, take this. Let's see what happens. Oh, they died. We won't do that again. We'll try something else. We have better regulations now for safety to keep, to stand by ethical standards. But still, the way you learn is that. The methodology of science is not. It's a lot of just trying things and then figuring it out backwards later on after something already worked. Most syndromes are picked up that way. That's how we learn. Now, the question that you have to ask yourself is that, first of all, does Allah learn? And second of all, is that the nature of Allah's knowledge? Is it based on pattern recognition? Is it based on trial and error? Does he increase in knowledge and learn? So you don't know. But if you were to answer yes to any of those questions, then you have a problem with your understanding of God altogether. The nature of Allah's knowledge, subhanahu wa ta'ala, is very different than ours. So no, he does not learn. And no, he does not increase in knowledge. And no, he does not base it on trial and error. He doesn't try something out and then he sees the pattern, then he goes back and does it again. That's not how he learns things. So when I say the ilm of Allah, the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I am not referring to something that is similar to the knowledge of myself or yourself or anyone else in this world, or the collective knowledge of the human race, which is what AI actually is the collective knowledge that of all human beings over long periods of time. Even that is not, this is not the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ilm. So you should not have a problem with anything that we describe regarding that knowledge. The only way I can predict the future is by having the outcomes programmed. That's the only way I can predict the future. Meaning I have to take the little car, I have to turn the thing, put it on a straight plane with a stable terrain, and have the tree right there, and then I turn it and I let it go, and I can predict before I let it go, this is going to slam in 3 seconds. It's going to slam into that tree, and voila, I let it go and it goes and hits the tree. That's the only way I can predict the future. Other ways is using epidemiology, for example, but that's the same thing, really. It's just observing over time. Well, you put 500,000 people together. What we've seen is that 10% of people will do this, 15% of people will do that. We have this percentage of people will die at young age, this percentage of people will become criminals, right? So it's just pattern recognition. And then when we see another 500,000, we act like we're geniuses. We're not. We saw it over there, we're going to do it over there. And then we do it over here, and we find, there's a difference. It's not exactly the same percentage. And we look for the reason, we find a reason. So we're learning. For you to think that that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala predicts the future, knows the future, is also another problem. So when you're like, how does he know what I'm going to do? The reason you're having a problem with this question, the reason that you're having a problem with this question, if you ask yourself that, is because you are assuming that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the future the way you would know the future, which is everything has to be pre-programmed. No choice involved. Because that's the only way I know the future. I know, but that's why you're not God. And that's why he is. Because you only know the future if there are no variables and there is no room for free choice or other decisions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows it despite all of that. Because he is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the nature of his knowledge is not the same as yours. Because I can't know what you're going to do tomorrow unless I force you to make certain choices. That's how I'm going to know the future. You have to be forced. You can't have choice. I have to have a programming in you. Is that how the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows? And obviously the answer is no to that. We'll stop with that. Inshallah, we'll continue this discussion inshallah next week. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى اله وصحبه اجمعين. جزاكم الله خير. بارك الله فيكم. الله اكبر الله